Everyone says murder happens in a moment. This one didn't. It built itself slowly, over years, warning after warning, red flag after red flag. And the most terrifying part? Almost everything was visible. So here's the question. How many small signs are actually countdowns? Because by the end of this story, you'll realize this wasn't unpredictable. It was ignored. Hollie Gazzard was 20 years old. She lived in Gloucester, worked as a hairdresser, and by every confirmed account, she was warm, social, and easy to be around. The kind of person who could make a room feel lighter just by stepping into it. Picture the ordinary rhythm of a salon. Dryers humming, scissors tapping, conversations bouncing from mirrors to waiting chairs. It's the kind of place built on trust, routine, and small talk. Safe, or at least it should be. But safety can look normal right up until it breaks. Because there was one person in her life who refused to let go. His name was Asher Maslin. They had known each other for years. Their relationship was on and off, ending and restarting again and again. From the outside, that can look familiar, almost boring even. Two young people who can't quite break the cycle. People see that and think, messy relationship, complicated breakup, emotional baggage. But what if complicated is just a word people use when they don't want to say dangerous? This is one of the hardest truths in cases like this. The most threatening behavior often arrives disguised as something ordinary. An ex who keeps texting, an unexpected appearance, a demand framed as concern, a warning disguised as jealousy. None of it has movie music behind it. None of it announces itself as the beginning of a lethal pattern. And that's exactly why it gets missed. Maslin didn't simply struggle to move on. According to the facts of the case, when Hollie finally did move on, he did not. He began messaging her constantly. He showed up uninvited. He tried to control who she saw. That's not random behavior. It's not accidental. It's targeted, persistent, obsessive. And here's the part people still get wrong, even now. This is not about love. It is about power. Love does not require surveillance. Love does not demand isolation. Love does not turn your freedom into its personal enemy. Yet again and again, in modern culture and in everyday language, obsession gets softened. He just cares so much. He's intense. He can't let go because he really loves her. Different words, same trap. But the next detail changes the atmosphere completely. At some point, there was a warning. Maslin said that if he ever saw Hollie with another man, there would be trouble. Listen to how easy it is for a sentence like that to vanish into the background. It can sound like a heated comment, a jealous outburst, something unpleasant, but not necessarily prophetic. People hear threats all the time and classify them emotionally instead of strategically. They think in terms of drama, not escalation. But what if a threat isn't a burst of emotion? What if it's a preview? That is one reason this case changed the conversation around stalking. Not because it introduced something completely new, but because it exposed something many people had been trained to minimize. The behavior wasn't chaotic. It was patterned. The warning signs weren't hidden. They were visible. The terrifying part is that visibility did not equal protection. And just when that reality starts to sink in, the story gets darker. February 18th, 2014. A normal workday. That detail matters. Not midnight. Not an isolated alley. Not a shadowy place where danger feels cinematic and obvious. A salon, in daylight. Routine all around her. Clients, conversations, appointments, ordinary life moving forward in neat little time slots. If danger can enter there, it can enter anywhere.
Keep your head straight for me.
Then Maslin
Almost
walked
done
in.
here. Are these
No
the
dramatic
first uniforms?
countdown.
Yes, they just arrived
No time
yesterday.
for anyone to process what was about to happen. Within moments, everything changed. He attacked Hollie inside the salon, in the middle of the day, in front of others. She died from her injuries. And if that fact feels impossible to absorb, that reaction is the point. Because the human mind wants to separate horror from the ordinary. It wants to believe there is a line between everyday life and catastrophic violence. But stalking cases often destroy that illusion. They don't always explode in hidden places. Sometimes they walk through the front door of a workplace. And yet, horrifying as that is, this still wasn't the full story. Because this was not Maslin's first killing. He had already killed another man, Brian Winkless. That single fact strips away one of the most persistent myths surrounding cases like this.
Did you reorder the
This was not some spontaneous crime of passion, as people often say when they want to explain violence without really examining it. It was not a lightning strike of emotion. It was a pattern, a confirmed, lethal pattern. Let that sink in for a second. People often imagine escalation as dramatic, a stairway you can visibly watch someone climb. But in real life, escalation can feel almost bureaucratic. One threat becomes a message. One message becomes many. One appearance becomes repeated surveillance. One act of violence becomes another. Step by step, the impossible becomes the predictable. Like water heating to a boil, the change can seem almost invisible until the temperature suddenly becomes deadly. And that's where this case hits so hard. It forces a brutal question. If someone shows you persistence, control, jealousy, intimidation, and threats, at what point do we stop calling it relationship turmoil and start calling it what it is? Some people still resist that framing. They argue that breakups are messy, that emotions run high, that not every controlling ex becomes a killer. And that is true. Not every case ends in murder. But the counter-argument matters even more. If a behavior pattern is known to signal risk, ignoring it because not every case reaches the worst possible outcome is like ignoring smoke because not every spark becomes a fire. The point is not panic. The point is recognition. This story is painful because the signs make sense in hindsight. But hindsight is exactly what prevention cannot rely on. After the attack, Maslin was arrested. He was later convicted of both murders and received a whole life sentence. He will never be released. Legally, that is the endpoint of accountability. Morally, though, the sentence does not erase the larger question this case left behind. A whole life sentence can punish a killer. It cannot restore the life that was taken.
Doesn't make sense.
And it cannot by itself teach a culture how to recognize danger earlier.
And that is where Hollie's story stops being only about one crime and becomes something larger. Her family turned tragedy into action. They created a trust to raise awareness about stalking and abuse. That response matters more than people sometimes realize. In the aftermath of violence, families often face a second battle, the battle against forgetting, minimizing, or flattening the victim into a headline. A trust does the opposite. It keeps saying, "This happened. It had warning signs, and if we learn nothing from it, the danger repeats." Think about how modern stalking often hides in plain sight, not always in a trench coat outside a window, but in relentless messages, digital pressure, surprise appearances, demands for access, threats framed as emotion, and attempts to control who someone sees. The technology changes. The psychology doesn't. In that sense, this case feels intensely contemporary, even in 2026. The platform updates, the pattern survives. And that leads to one of the most disturbing parts of the whole story. As a society, we still romanticize things that should alarm us. Persistence becomes devotion. Jealousy becomes proof of passion. Monitoring becomes protection. Isolation becomes, he just wants her all to himself, as if possessiveness were flattering instead of dangerous. Pop culture has done this for decades.
Real life pays the bill for that confusion. But what if the traits many people are taught to read as intensity are actually early warning signs of coercion? That question matters because stalking rarely begins with the final act. It begins with boundary violations, tiny overruns, tests. Answer me. Where are you? Who are you with? Why didn't you reply? Then more. Then more. A person's world slowly gets reorganized around someone else's need for control. And because each step can seem small in isolation, the larger pattern becomes easier to miss until it no longer can be ignored. In Hollie's case, the facts cut through every excuse. She moved on. He did not. He messaged constantly. He showed up uninvited. He tried to control who she saw. He issued a warning about another man. Then he entered her workplace and killed her. This sequence matters. Each confirmed detail reinforces the one before it. Together, they do not describe romance gone wrong. They describe escalation. And if that sounds blunt, it should. There is a strange comfort in believing violence comes from nowhere. Because if it comes from nowhere, then no one could have seen it. No one could have intervened. No one has to confront how often warning signs are normalized. But this case resists that comfort. It tells a more frightening truth. The path to catastrophe can be visible long before the catastrophe itself. That doesn't mean every bystander knows exactly what will happen. It means the behavior itself deserves to be taken seriously much sooner than people usually take it. The issue is not predicting every detail. The issue is recognizing risk before risk becomes irreversible. And then comes the emotional contradiction at the center of this case. Hollie's story is deeply personal. One young woman, one family, one community shattered. But it is also tragically universal. Almost everyone knows some version of these warning signs. The ex who won't stop contacting. The partner who turns social life into a battleground. The person who treats no as a negotiation. That familiarity is what makes the story so unsettling. It doesn't feel distant enough. It feels recognizable. That's why this case changed public conversation. Not overnight, not perfectly, and not completely, but significantly. It became a reference point for stalking awareness because it exposed the mechanics of escalation in a way people could not easily dismiss. It shifted the question from why did this happen to why were these behaviors not treated with the seriousness they deserved? And notice how different those questions are. Why did this happen? Often invites a search for a dramatic trigger, a final argument, a singular emotional explosion. Why were the signs ignored? Forces us to examine culture, language, and habit. It asks harder things. Why do we downplay obsession? Why do we tell people to be polite when they feel afraid? Why do we still confuse attention with care? Why are some threats heard as noise until after the damage is done? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Because ordinary life trains people to smooth things over, to not overreact, to give the benefit of the doubt, to explain away fixation as heartbreak and control as insecurity. Those instincts can be socially useful in low-risk situations. In stalking cases, they can be disastrous. And still, there is something else this story leaves us with. Something heavier than outrage. Responsibility. Not the simplistic kind that blames victims for not doing more. Not that. The real responsibility is collective.
He knows we're here.
It belongs to the way communities interpret behavior, to the way friends react when someone says, "He keeps showing up," to the way workplaces respond when an ex refuses boundaries, to the way society talks about jealousy and control, to whether we treat fear as information or as inconvenience. Because fear is not melodrama. Sometimes, fear is data. That may be the most important line in this entire story. Persistence is not love. Fear is a warning. And when a person's behavior keeps crossing boundaries, the question is no longer whether they mean well. The question is what the pattern is revealing. Maslin's conviction and whole life sentence closed the legal case, but it did not close the cultural lesson. If anything, the lesson has only become more relevant. Today, with constant digital access, the pressure can feel even more relentless. Contact is easier. Monitoring is easier.
Can you believe this guy?
Turning obsession into a 24-hour presence is easier, which means the old myths are even more dangerous now. So when people say this case is from 2014, it can sound like history. It isn't. It's a warning carried forward. And here is the open loop we began with. The one detail that changes everything. The most terrifying part of the Hollie Gazzard case is not only what happened in that salon, It's that the story before the salon makes sense. The pattern is understandable. The sequence is traceable. The escalation is visible. In other words, the horror is not randomness. It is recognizability. That is why this case lingers. Because once you see it clearly, you start noticing how often dangerous behavior gets repackaged in softer language. You hear, "He's just intense," and it sounds different. You hear, "He only does it because he cares," and it sounds different. You hear, "That's just how he is," and it sounds different. Suddenly, the euphemisms stop working. And maybe that's the only honest way to end this story. Hollie Gazzard was 20 years old. She should have had time. Time at work, to laugh, to change her mind, to move on, to become older than the photographs that now represent her. Instead, her name became attached to a lesson no family should ever have to teach. Stalking is not harmless. Obsession is not romance. And patterns matter long before headlines appear. If this case stays with you, let it stay for the right reason. Not as shock for shock's sake, but as clarity. Because the line between concerning and catastrophic is often crossed gradually, then all at once. And by the time everyone agrees it was serious, it is sometimes already too late. We'll be breaking down the exact warning signs people miss before stalking turns dangerous. The phrases, behaviors, and escalation patterns that often get explained away. Subscribe so you don't miss that episode. Because honestly, it could be one of the most useful videos on this channel. And one final thing, if there is any lesson this case leaves behind, it's this. When someone refuses to respect the boundary, believe the pattern before you're forced to believe the outcome.